Hello, society, and thank you for joining The Social Solution with Maya Brown, where we will discuss recent social injustices and relate them to the current news. If you have a passion for social justice and want to stay informed society, then this is the podcast for you. Remember that if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. We are currently in the middle of a revolution for Black people, not just a moment. Today we will be talking about the relationship between law enforcement and minorities. We will also cover protests and looting, the Black Lives Matter movement, and white privilege. As research consistently shows that minorities are more likely than whites to view law enforcement with both suspicion and distrust, minorities frequently report that the police disproportionately singles them out because of their race. For those that need any proof or evidence, just look at the new headlines and hashtags every day. From Breonna Taylor to George Floyd, the list just keeps getting longer and longer every day. So much time has passed on and nothing has changed. So joining us today, we have former Stony Brook administrator and student advisor, Durron Newman, and a junior journalism major at Stony Brook University, Julio Taku, who want to discuss and share their opinions on the relationship between law enforcement and minorities and the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole. For our first topic, we have with us today Durron Newman to talk about the recent killings and the Black Lives Matter movement. So how are you doing?
Honestly, I can say the best that I can be right now. I mean, I'm happy to be alive. I'm happy to be functioning. But with everything going on, it's sometimes hard to kind of wake up and feel so great. You know what I mean?
Of course.
Despite
Yeah.
just the fact of being able to breathe every day. It's tough. It's tough. It's really tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Having like a comfortable conversations and all the negative news. It's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been having so many conversations, not only with like friends and family, but with students, former employees, other people, online, things like that. Just some difficult conversations, some easy conversations because I know what the facts are, but
Yeah.
other conversations can be so difficult when there's opposition. I would say to facts and truths.
Right.
So yeah.
No, for sure. So I guess to start this conversation, I'll give a little background to those who may not know. On May 25th, George Floyd, a 46-year-old unarmed Black man from Minneapolis, was killed by a white police officer after he kept his knee on Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes. Floyd's death has now sparked protests and messages for social change all across the nation. So what was your reaction to the news of George Floyd?
Oh man, all I could think about was me. As a Black man, um, all I could think about is like what if that were me? And I think I've thought that way for a while with a lot of things that have gone on. But what if that were me? And what really got me, even about the video, was just watching the officer's face, sort of with this. I don't really care what anybody's saying around me. Um, I'm gonna keep my knee here, and none of you can do anything. Sort of just really cocky bravado attitude, and really a lack of care for humanity in his eyes. So that's the whole thing really just shook me because it was just like, wow, another one. And when I think about Colin Kaepernick and what he was kneeling for, and other people what they were fighting for, this is it. This is exactly it.
Right. All of the officers, they all did nothing.
Absolutely. Well, they said one officer, I think the one that's out on bail right now or bond, I think Kay Lane, he had when George Floyd said I couldn't breathe, he wanted to turn him over, and Chauvin officer said no. So
Wow.
it seems like one of them wanted to help, but just part of the boys club. If not everybody's all together, then it's not going to happen.
And that's the main problem,
right?
I think. What kind of punishment do you think the police officers that were involved should receive?
Honestly, I've been reading up on it because I know they first started with I think third degree. And I'm continuing to read up on what the first degree and take it to really mean from there. But I think they had gave him a, sort of like, I don't say an easy sentence. Nothing's easy when you go into jail. But I think there's so many there's loopholes within the law when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to police officers where they either don't serve any time or they serve very little time that protects them against things like this. So
Right.
honestly, I think he should get whatever the max is when it comes to manslaughter and homicide. Whatever that max is, he needs to be able to get that. The
Mm-hmm.
others, I don't know what they would charge them because their knee wasn't on his neck, but they're still accomplices to a murder.
Correct. Yeah. And I feel like, I guess getting justice for George Floyd, their punishment has been a step towards that. But for people like Breonna Taylor, her killers still have not been.
Absolutely, and I think one of the reasons why, and I talked to several officers, and sometimes whenever I either post something or I say something, I try to get my research before I do that, and even when I do, I still try to get research anyway. So I have several friends and family who are cops, and I ask certain questions about that, and it goes to this thing called the no knock warrant, and
Mm-hmm.
the police officers feel like they need a no knock warrant because they use it as a tactic to to gain entry into places where they feel like there's an arrest should be made or whatever it may be. But I think with the Breonna Taylor, we're waiting for there's so many different stories that went out that they hit the wrong house or this and that, but then there's other stories that they thought they saw there was a package that went in and out of that house that had to deal with a drug bust from somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that they want this no knock tactic to assist them in their duties, but then things like this happen. The boyfriend's there and somebody breaks in, you know, automatically you're on defense mode. You don't have to announce yourself. You don't know who it is. I think it doesn't,
Right.
and I don't think it benefits cops at that point. When you have a no, and I'm not a cop, so I can't really sit here and give my full feelings about it. But I would think that it's also dangerous for cops with a no knock warrant because when you go in there, you don't know who's there and who's ready to
Right.
shoot because they're trying to defend themselves for whatever it means it may be.
Mm-hmm.
So I
You could
think
think it's an intruder.
absolutely. So I think because of this no knock warrant and the story's going to is the reason why those officers have not been uh arrested yet or
Right.
at all.
Mm-hmm. Going back to George Floyd, how can we as a society kind of achieve justice for him and all of the other lives that have been lost to police brutality?
Honestly, what we're doing right now, this is a pure shift. I don't know if anybody else is feeling it, but to have this many people, this many cultures, just many race, just being able to stand for something that has been so much of an injustice for over 400 years is absolutely amazing to watch. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is what needs to happen. We need to vote people in power and vote the right people. And it's hard because politics are politics, but we
Right.
have to find a way to find people that are going to represent justice and not represent putting money in their pockets and being in a powerful position. I think continuing to protest, continuing to fight, but not just everybody's going to have to play their role. There's going to be protesters. There's going to be information givers. There's going to be people who are going to be pushing for the vote. There's going to be people pushing for legislation, people who understand policy. Everybody has to play their part. And whatever part that
Mm-hmm.
they feel that they're good in, people need to do that. I may not be a person that's so good at understanding all the policies, but I'm a person that's good at getting people together, understand that you got to know your worth to be able to fight. That'll be that, that's where I'm strong at. So I think
Mm-hmm.
people finding where they're strong at and placing it into action when it comes to the cause.
Right. And there's so many things that you can do, like from petitions to, like you said, protesting, donating. And
Absolutely.
like even in other countries, you're seeing protests happening and they're huge as well.
Oh
And
man, yeah,
statues,
yeah.
like, racist statues are also being taken down there. So I think it has spread literally internationally.
I literally shed a tear when I saw, I think it was Berlin when they pulled it down, and I was like, wow, like
Mm.
this is a revolution.
Mm-hmm.
We have, if you look at our money, slave owners. You look at these statues, slave owners. It's almost like, living in a farm, no, village, and you're praying. Like we're praying to these deities. You know what I mean? These are like the gods
Yeah.
of America. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's so much to
That's what
learn.
we learn in school.
Absolutely right. So watching them being torn down, because a lot of them are there off the backs of black people, black
Right.
inventors, black workers, black philosophers, all those things off the backs of black people. And watching people say, you know what, forget that, we're turning. When you look at other countries, when they fight and they're trying to tear down a government that has been known for their corruption, they go in there and they get busy. They're taking
Yeah,
down
that's the only way.
statues. And sometimes that's just is what it is. There's no
Right.
rules to rioting. There's no rules to protesting. And sometimes, and I pray that no one gets hurt or killed or anything, but sometimes some stuff got to get torn down.
Right. And that's the reason I think it's having a lot of change now too, is because a lot of people aren't scared anymore.
Yes,
Like, and when we've tried to do it peacefully, we've tried, like Colin, he kneeled and that was peaceful, but it didn't get us anywhere. So I think that this is starting something.
absolutely. And you can go deeper than Colin. You can go to Martin Luther King. You go to how
Yeah.
many peaceful
Keep going.
protests there's been? Years of peace. There's so many peaceful protests that we don't even hear about, that are
Hmm.
happening in other states, but they don't get the media coverage.
Right. Yes, but I have to pick a bone with the media as well with that. Um, they are not exaggerating, but I feel like they're covering the violence that's
Absolutely.
happening. They're not
Absolutely.
covering the peaceful ones because there's peaceful ones happening every day in
Absolutely.
like towns everywhere. We
Absolutely.
just don't see it.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that's sometimes, it's hard to tell who's doing what, because you got the anarchists and you got the Antifa and then you got the regular people, then you got the people who are out for themselves looting. It's hard to tell
Yeah.
who it really is, but I can tell you like this, honestly, the whole essence and aura of the Black Lives movement, that's not it. You know what I mean? Yeah,
Right.
we gotta get loud and tear some stuff up, but I don't think the majority of people are out there for selfish gain.
Right. We're fighting for what we should have had a long time ago.
Absolutely.
So there's a statistic that I also found. It said, despite only making up 13% of the U.S. population, Black Americans are 2.5 times as likely as white Americans to be killed by the police. So, what kind of factors do you think kind of go into this statistic?
I mean, it goes down in history from when they started security and police department. Everything was to control and jail people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it still happens now. There's a perceived, and again, this is history. This is what people are taught. Families who are brought up in from racist generations. This is what they're taught. The police department. It may not be what they're taught, but it's so ingrained that it's hard to leave the way people exude that energy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like anybody black, they're a threat.
Right.
And I think they're a threat to them because they're afraid of our true power of who we are as a people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also a way of afraid being they're envious, and we cannot allow them to be anywhere above us. This white supremacy notion, this white supremacy stereotype has been ingrained for so long, and it's not even.
Yeah.
It shouldn't even be a thing. You know what I
It
mean?
shouldn't.
It
No.
shouldn't
Yeah,
be
of
a
course.
thing. So I think the statistics are there because of a history of police brutality, history of aggression towards blacks. You can't sit here, you can't go here, you can't drink on this water fountain, you can't sit near this one of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with the police department. You see a black man, he's trying to revolt. Uh-oh, we got to kill him. He's getting out of line. Again,
Right.
slave treatment. A white man's not
Mm-hmm.
really going to get in line. He's only speaking for his rights. But a black man speaking for his rights is getting out of line.
Exactly. And that's what we saw with I guess people protesting for like the economy shutting down and everything, and they wanted things to be open up again, and they weren't met with violence. But then, in comparison to the Black Lives Matter movement, when we're doing this, we are met with violence,
Absolutely. And
or we're seen as the bad people.
exactly. But you see these people, some of these people that were carrying these guns. I remember seeing one video, and the officer was trying to move this protester because they went to. Oh, he had a gun. And the guy is a white man. He had his hand on his gun while he's wrestling with the police officer. Not one gun or taser was pulled. And I know if that was a black man, it would have been 3, 4 guns pulled on this person already.
Mm-hmm.
Even just for even say, look at Philando Castile. He said, "I have a gun in my car and it's registered," and that cop got nervous and shot him.
It's ridiculous. But if it's a different skin color, it would be otherwise.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly believe that.
Yeah. I guess going back to the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole. So it was originally founded in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer.
Mm-hmm.
And the mission of the movement is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities. And they also demand acknowledgement and accountability for the dehumanization of Black life at the hands of the police. Um, and then, as a call for a national defunding of police, people are also demanding investment in our communities and the resources to ensure Black people not only survive, but thrive. So, what is your opinion on defunding the police? I know it's a very controversial topic right now.
I had a conversation with a friend and he was like, I don't get this defund the police. And I'm like, listen, there's billions of dollars that is funded into the police department.
Mm-hmm.
And not even a fraction that would make a difference is funded into the community or into the schools. You have
Right.
the hospital workers wearing garbage bags, not having masks because we when this pandemic started, they lacked supplies, but you didn't lack supplies and ammunition and gear for police officers. That's
Exactly.
crazy.
Mm-hmm.
These both, if you look at both of them are there to save lives. And if you think about it, a hospital is probably saving more lives than a cop is. Because
Exactly, especially during a pandemic,
Absolutely. So for them not to have spot, and then all the funding that's going into police department, like, look, I'm not saying we don't need police. I don't think that we need to create this utopia where we don't have police and everybody's able to police themselves. I think that's absolutely ludicrous and thus is not ideal. But I do believe we need to take a significant amount of funding from the cops and bring that into the community to really uplift the community. I posted this video. It was a cartoon video about systematic racism because one of Trump's people went on the news and said that systematic racism doesn't exist. And
no.
yeah, he's absolutely nuts. So it broke down what it was, but you could even look from the banks to the school system, so all these different things. Look at where the funding is going. So I think if we begin to start to take some of those billions out and be able to put it into community, we'll make some changes. Because what happens even with the Black Lives Matter and other initiatives, you lack funding. And it's hard to continue to have dedicated people for the cause when sometimes they're trying to pay their bills too. They're trying to work. And how many people can you get for this cause when you don't have enough funding?
Exactly. I think people kind of need to understand that the police will still be funded. It's just they won't be overfunded.
Thank you.
And that budget will be, redistributed so that everyone gets a fairer share of things.
Absolutely.
Like you were saying, like we should be overfunding schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, not just the police department. And yeah, it's just a reassessment of our values and investing in things that matter.
It's absolutely, they said Chauvin recently, they said in the news that if he retires, he's still eligible for his like retirement payment and all this stuff if he's even if he's convicted or whatever it may be. And it's just like there's so many, if we don't, you got to look deep, and we have to, it's almost like you got to go into the deep web because they try to hide so many things. You have to look deep into the laws, into the fine print, and look at all the things that protect them. Why are so much money going into police department? Let's really look into that. Where's the money going? We're citizens too. It's just like if I go to school, Stony Brook, right? You go to Stony Brook University. You go to Stony Brook University and you pay your tuition. You have every right to go up to the HR or the chancellor's office and say, "Where's my money going to? I want to know."
Right.
You have every right, and we have every right as taxpayers to know where the money in which we're putting into, where's it going? What is this $1 billion? What's the breakdown of the $1 billion going into the police department? We want to know.
Especially New York City, it's extremely high.
Oh, absolutely.
Extremely high.
Absolutely. When unemployment rate is again back up again. We have so many people who don't have jobs. So many people are struggling for jobs, but you got $1 billion poured into a system that is has years of corruption.
Correct. And cops get paid, I don't know how many more times the amount that teachers get paid, and teachers make a big difference in people's lives as well. There's a whole bunch of other roles that should be getting paid
I would
as
say
high as that.
astronomical differences. I said something I said teachers and counselors should start off in the six figures. No,
Hmm.
and if anything, start off at 70, 80, $90,000 because of what you do. You're teaching your students, and yeah, some of the curriculum they teach is that they have to teach is straight BS. But they're wearing so many
Yeah.
different hats. It's I'm a
Correct.
counselor. I'm a a fake dad. I'm a fake brother. I'm a
Right.
you're all these
Hmm.
wearing so many different hats, and they're getting paid chunks. Just can't even. Some of them living with roommates because they can't pay their bills.
It's
That's
terrible.
sad. That shows
Hmm.
where America puts their value.
Right. And I think defunding the police is a big step towards just, I guess, getting us equity and equality.
Absolutely. You said it. That word equity. Absolutely. We need to have stake in where our money is going. We are the stakeholders. Where is our money going? We need to know. We want to have input or where it's being put. That's why when they send out these census stuff and they send out these voting, people got to. You can't sit on your ass. You have to go
Right.
out there and you have to make it. You have to
Represent.
represent and have a voice. And people that are getting out of jail who have made something of themselves, they need to be able to vote too. Just because they had a past of wrongdoing and if they've reformed and they've recovered themselves, absolutely they should be able to vote.
Hmm. Right. Their voice still matters and they should be heard.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. I have one more question for you. So in my opinion, I don't think it's enough to be non-racist. I had a conversation with one of my friends the other day. I was telling them you have to be unapologetically anti-racist. So there's like no excuse for someone to not care because the lives of Black people are at stake. And like I kind of said before, we're basically fighting, our own genocide. And now is not the time to be silent, and it shouldn't be a debate, in my opinion. So, what would you say to those that are kind of ignorant to what is going on, or to the people that are saying all lives matter?
I would say, look, I would tell them to get on their phones, get on a computer, start search, or go to a library and start searching history. Does anybody tell the Jews to forget about Holocaust? Does anybody tell the Irish who were treated like nothing sometimes when they can in America do that? Does anybody learn about the Native Americans whose land like do you tell these people that they got to get over it, or do you speak up? And if it was your family, whether you're Italian, whether you're Greek, whatever, it was your family, and they told you, you know what, Greeks don't matter, or Italians don't matter, or
Mm-hmm.
a Poland, whatever, wherever you're from, that's
Right.
non black, it doesn't matter. How would you feel? And I think there's a continual perception that although that person may not be technically racist, down the line in their history, their parents and their parents' parents and their parents' parents have had these feelings for so long in different ways. You can't bring a black
It's
guy home.
ingrained.
You can't bring a
Yeah.
black woman home. All these little subtle things may not come out as just like, oh, you're not saying it's racist, but it is racism. And there's so
Mm-hmm.
many subtle things that are infused within their mindset that they sometimes don't even know it. Whether they have
Right.
history
Implicit
by or
bias.
implicit by, absolutely. You don't even know it. But what I say is, you know enough of right and wrong as you've grown as a human being and as an adult in this country or in this world that you can say, this don't seem that right. I need to either be against it or for it. And you need to choose that side. If you're staying in the middle, that right there it's hard for me to
You're
trust you.
choosing exactly. You're choosing the side of the oppressor.
Absolutely. That's me, because if it was happening to you, if you were getting shot and killed, if you were being oppressed, how would you feel? So at the end of the day, it's wrong. And if you're and I say especially to people who are like my friends, if you're hanging out with me and you know and you say you love me, I love this guy. I
Mm-hmm.
love this guy. I used to be my football players, my friends, or white guys. We love Durron. Get him a beer. Da, 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 da. You say you love me. I want to see you speak out too.
Exactly.
Because if I died tomorrow, would you be at my funeral crying? And if
Mm-hmm.
you say yes, then you need to speak out against racism.
Right. It's not enough to say that you care because your friend cares. You should care because it's just, I don't know. It's your morals.
Moral compass. And
Exactly.
it's I always say you can't. I never want to put my expectations. I always just say don't, especially about relationships. Like, it's hard for people to put their expectations on other people, because people have a hard time following through with your expectations. But in something like this, if you are considered a person, or you consider yourself a person of justice, you have to know that racism is wrong and it needs to change, and you should be able to speak out. Whether you say a little or you say a lot, you need to stand for something.
For our second topic, we have with us today Julio Taku to talk about riots and protests and the real reason behind looting. So, in my opinion, I think that the protests are honestly beautiful. When it comes to riots, they are also what we need right now. We are protesting basically our own genocide, and we have tried peaceful protests time after time, and nothing has changed. But people seem to be okay with riots when Americans want the economy to open back up. But these riots are ways of letting our voices be heard for a desperate need for action to be taken. I remember a couple weeks ago, a Black and Latino journalist was arrested before the police officer who killed George Floyd was even arrested. So that alone is a reason to riot, in my opinion. So what is kind of your opinion on the protests that you have seen?
So far in the protests that we've seen, and over time, there has been less and less media coverage of said protests because the riot aspect of it has died down, and even the riots that might happen aren't being publicized. But the protests that have occurred, they've all been in good faith. The Black Lives Matter movement itself is a non-violent one on its face. It's not meant to escalate into riots. However, riots happen when people are frustrated, fed up, and they feel unheard.
Mm-hmm.
It is not random or out of the blue to have people riot and tear things down when such harsh injustice is witnessed by the whole world and no action is taken on the part of the government and the law enforcement who have been sworn in to protect said public.
Mm-hmm.
It's a failure on the part of law enforcement, failure on the part of the local government and the federal government, that people feel they need to riot to get any form of attention and traction behind their movement.
Right. No, that's very true. I know all of the protests that I've been to personally, I think I've been to 3 or 4, they've all been peaceful. And all the ones on Long Island, for the most part, have been peaceful too. It's just the media sometimes just shows the violent parts. But people need to understand that we've been trying to do it peaceful for so long. So, like you said, when people are frustrated, sometimes the riots do happen. Have you been to any, or do you know of any friends or family that have, and like what their experience was when they went to protests?
I personally haven't been able to attend any protests because, as we both know, COVID is still very much real. And another gross inequity we're seeing is the fact that Black people are having to choose between
Yeah.
a virus that kills us disproportionately and law enforcement that kills us disproportionately. And in protesting against the police brutality, we put ourselves at risk of catching this virus, which we
Mm-hmm.
might not get proper treatment for and will pass away from contracting it in the first place.
Right.
So I personally haven't been able to attend, but I have several friends and know many people who have been attending said protests. All the ones that have happened here on Long Island have been peaceful. The only aggression that has been seen, it's on the part of white conservative Long Island residents, like you saw in Merrick and like you saw in Smithtown,
Mm-hmm.
who were the real agitators and troublemakers during these protests, because these the protest organizers and protesters themselves have to coordinate with law enforcement, which is, it seems oxymoronic to have a protest but then have to collaborate with the law enforcement, but that's what has to be done. They collaborate with law enforcement to have these things take place and to happen peacefully. The routes are planned out, the chants are planned out, the how long the protest is planned out, and you
Mm-hmm.
have these counter protesters who come in and scream for the protesters to go back home, scream for them to get out of their town, tell them all lives matter, throw racial epithets at them, throw physical objects at them. And like in the case of the Smithtown protests, um, a group of teenagers, they wound up getting jumped by grown men who lured them in under the guise of wanting to have a conversation. And being as naive and optimistic as those kids were, they thought it would be an opportunity to educate. These are
Mm-hmm.
grown men. This isn't their first time seeing a protest against police brutality. If they were going to change their minds, they would have done it by now. It's
Mm-hmm.
bold to assume the conversation you have will change something, in the sense that they're stuck in their ways,
Right.
especially in the atmosphere that they did it. It's literally after a protest. That wasn't this grown man's watershed moment to decide, oh, I'm not going to be racist and bigoted anymore. Like, that's not going to happen. And because of their show of innocence and trust in that they would be safe, they got physically beaten by grown men. And the law enforcement, as far as I know, haven't made any arrests in that case.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one instance here on Long Island where it went sour, so to speak. But everything else has been good. I've been in contact with local organizers and organizations just to make sure that the small grassroots people, like movements that are happening, and the
Mm-hmm.
somewhat sporadic protests that occur are working in tandem and with connections to larger organizations on the island, because the sustainability of this movement is through networking and collaboration with established groups and leaders in these communities. It makes no sense, if you believe in this movement, for you to just decide. And more often than not, from what I've seen, these some of these random protests are led by white people who, under the guise and with the intention of being allies. You can't hold these protests, and they, whether or not they go well, and not get get in touch with local black organizers in order to make sure this isn't just a one-off, and also so you're not just patting yourself on the back to feel better, like, oh, I did something,
I
I helped
did
with the
something.
Black Lives
Exactly.
Matter movement, I think I've done enough now. No, the sustainability in this movement is in solidarity and continued work moving forward.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So I've been helping connect the dots behind the scenes because I can't be on the forefront.
Mm-hmm. Which is great. And like you said, it's on, like, it's not a moment, it's a movement, a revolution. So I love that I've been seeing protests, like poster protests and flyers for them pretty much every day and every
Hmm.
week. They haven't been stopping, and I'm honestly proud of Long Island for that. I know it's been happening almost in every town, even in the towns that don't want it to happen. People find a way for it to happen in that
Exactly.
town. Um, so I guess in terms of looting, there's a lot of controversy behind that. I haven't seen it happen recently, but I guess like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, it was happening. What I have to say about that is basically, I believe that this country is stolen land. Well, it is. That
Hmm.
was built by Black people for free. And a key focus of the police is to protect capitalist assets.
Hmm.
Like, that's the way that I view it. So I guess, what is your view on looting, and on the looting that was occurring, especially the first week of protests after George Floyd's death?
You hit the nail right on the head. Part of the job of the police is to protect capitalist assets, and I will never, ever, 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 for the life of me, trivialize or question someone who's choosing to damage a corporate establishment and take advantage of the fact that looting is going on so they can
Mm-hmm.
get theirs. A life was lost. A life was stolen, in fact, and several lives have been stolen. The only reason we are pushed to do these things, or these things occur in the first place, is due to failure on the part of the government and local law enforcement. So if
Yes.
people are going to loot and steal as a result of this, in the midst of all this madness, I'm not going to then talk down on them because they do
Mm-hmm.
not own these establishments. Like the biggest one was the Target that was burnt down with
Yes.
the
Mm-hmm.
initial riots and protests. None of the people in that community have a stake in that Target. They don't own that Target. It doesn't belong to them. That is a corporate body that exists to serve the community. And even then, it likely underserves them in regards to shoppers being profiled, people being denied access to certain things, and
Mm-hmm.
just the day to day like microaggressions and inequities you see in like grocery stores and department stores.
Mm-hmm.
So if people see it fit during these protests and riots, or protests that sometimes turn into riots, I'm not going to say they're two separate things because they are one and the same to me.
Mm-hmm.
If they see it fit to steal from said Target, I don't have anything to say about it. Like, go and get yours. What you have for you to steal and to loot, you have to feel so disenfranchised and you have to be so shorted in your resources that you feel it is
Exactly.
necessary to steal. You think it is okay to steal and you do it. Your art, that means somewhere in your life, maybe in fact in several places, you have been shorted and you've been maligned and all these different things to the point where you have to steal to get things that you either want or need.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there are structural and institutional and systemic failures on many levels that would lead people to feel it's okay to steal in the first place. So I don't
Right.
fault the looters. I really don't. And are there
Mm-hmm.
opportunists? Most definitely. But amongst those opportunists are also people who are lacking, sometimes due to systemic issues. Again, so
Right.
I'm not gonna knock these people. The most I'm going to say is be safe, and I don't need them turning into another hashtag because we're sick and
Mm-hmm.
tired of it.
Yes, when I first saw the Target being burned down, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, this is not supposed to happen." A lot of people didn't like it. So I looked into it, and that Target actually had a bunch of racial discrimination suits against
Hmm.
them. They also denied people milk when there was a lot of tear gas.
Exactly.
And I think that just that one Target being burned down was nothing in comparison to what like the KKK has done in the past. They burned down homes, churches, and people. This was just a target. So
Literally.
I think that, like what you said, like I'm not putting blame on anyone, and I think that they have a right to do it. They just want justice and equality. I probably wouldn't do it, but I think that when people are really, really mad, I think that it's okay.
Exactly. You don't have to condone the action to be able to
Exactly.
understand it. And that's something that
Right.
a lot of Americans have trouble doing. I'm not just going to say white Americans because there are black Americans who even feel the same way and other non-black
Hmm.
POCs who feel the same way. They're like, why would you burn down the Target? You just took away someone's job. You just did this, that, and the last.
Yeah. Hmm.
Target's own CEO came out like what 2-3 days after the Target was burnt down and said he stands in solidarity with the protesters. He would
Yeah.
send resources. He would also give full pay to the people who are now out of a job and give them positions in other surrounding targets and would support them to make sure they were okay.
Hmm. Yes, I
So
love that message. I remember
on
seeing it.
the target level, the corporate level, they're able to understand. It's not even. I'm not even going to say forgive because it's not their place to forgive their store being burnt down. They're
Hmm.
able to understand where the protesters and the rioters and the looters are coming from. What? Why are so many Americans mourning the corpse more than the dead?
That's very true.
Like, why are you feeling so
Right.
bad about billionaire, multi-billion-dollar corporate Target more so than you are pissed off for the reason why they looted in the first place? Like,
Right.
why aren't you more pissed off that George Floyd was murdered on camera for the whole world to see? You're upset that the Target was burnt down. You don't even shop there, first off. So you don't lose anything. You don't lose any sleep because that Target is burned down. You don't now have to go to a different store because that Target is burnt down. Members of that community burnt it down. Allow them to mourn the loss of that store.
Exactly. I agree with everything you just said. That's very true. Um, and I feel like that night of the riots in Minneapolis, that had a big effect. Um, so, what kind of effect do you think all of the other protests and riots that occurred are having on the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think on a very global scale, it has reinvigorated the activist spirit in so many of us. Within that same week, I saw video footage and news coverage of protests taking place in Korea, in Russia, in Belgium, France, the UK, Syria, for Christ's sake. Syria, that's a country that has been literally carpet bombed for decades now. And they made time to create shrines in George Floyd's memory
Mm-hmm.
to express solidarity. Palestine, they've been a huge proponent for Black Lives Matter for a while now. And I wasn't even aware of this until I did the research and did my own reading into it. Palestine has always been there, even during the Ferguson protests, which were the literal prototype, I believe, for what we're seeing today, because that was the first true public showing of civil disobedience, rioting, and protest, probably the first since the LA riots in 1992. At
Mm-hmm.
least this is in recent memory. I'm not old enough to have been there in 92, but relatively speaking, that was the prototype. You have all these different countries showing solidarity and speaking up in George Floyd's honor and also in memory of the lives lost in their respective countries, because Black people exist on damn near every continent. We are a global people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have
Yeah.
other people who are now voicing their frustrations and anger with the institutions they deal with, because they've now seen the most violent and just gross showing of hatred and injustice in George Floyd's killing, his murder, and
Mm-hmm.
they've started their own uprisings. Everybody is mobilizing now, so it is very very different from previous movements, because never have you had so many countries and peoples move unilaterally towards justice.
Exactly. Yeah, I think this uprising occurred at a good time just because with the coronavirus, I feel like there were no other distractions, you know? I feel like everybody was focused towards this movement and everybody's kind of like, okay, we need change, we need global
Precisely.
change. So, yeah, I just feel like the timing was good in that aspect. Um, so I guess I'll move a little bit to a protest that happened in Smithtown.
Hmm.
I know you kind of helped spread the word about a specific protest that was basically a plot set up to harm protesters. Can you tell me a little bit more about that situation? What you kind of did? I know you were behind the I guess like behind the scenes.
All right. Well, first, I'm going to immediately disprove that it was a plot set up to harm protesters, because that's not what it was.
Okay.
What
Mm-hmm.
the situation was, a friend of mine had brought to my attention the original flyer for this protest, and it had inflammatory language and an image of people standing in front of, I believe, the burning target from
Okay.
the original riots,
Mm-hmm.
and it had the words Inferno, Mosh, and Rebel. Just very red flag type of words, very
Right.
aggressive words and images. So I immediately thought to myself, it was also really well made. I immediately thought to myself, okay, if there's a fake protest going on, this is definitely it. This looks like it was made by either a police department or some agitator who has a really good understanding and grasp
Mm-hmm.
of Photoshop, because it looked really good. It looked too good compared to the Snapchatted screenshots and Instagram stories that had been used prior to spread the
Right.
word on these
Mm-hmm.
protests. So I immediately contacted the person who was organizing these protests over Twitter. A friend and myself went back and forth with this organizer for probably 3 hours on Twitter. And we were trying to get them to understand, hey, if this is supposed to be a peaceful protest, the image you're putting out does not indicate that. It is not conducive or neither does it indicate any form of peace. It is very inflammatory and
Mm-hmm.
looks violent. The organizer also wasn't replying to any of the messages she was being sent. Like, people were replying to her initial tweet on her timeline, and she wasn't replying to any of them. And she actually blocked some of them and changed her username. So
Interesting.
it was already looking very fishy.
Sketchy.
So
Yeah.
I continued to pursue, sent her DMs on Instagram and on Twitter, and I was trying to just get to the bottom of it. Like, hey, if your intention is a peaceful protest, at this point, the image of this protest you're planning to have has been mired. It's been completely muddied up. Because in the replies, you had people who were genuinely interested in attending the protest, but were concerned about the imagery and just wanted to know it was peaceful. And you
Mm-hmm.
also had Smithtown residents and other Long Island residents who were threatening violence or alluding to something bad happening if said protest was to take place. And amongst those two people, were also bots. Like, you hear on the news and on Twitter, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
and other platforms that bots are used to, like, incite violence and agitate. I saw in real time bots responding and replying to me and to her under the tweet and interacting with it like actual people.
Okay.
So that immediately set off red flags, and I was like, all right, this has to be a movie or something. So I was finally able to get a hold of her, and I told her, I was like, hey, like, I see where your heart is. Like, it's good that you want to have this protest, but at this point, there were Smithtown residents who had taken the image of her poster and attached it to a flyer with a warning about the protest and a request to create a human chain around the businesses that the protest was supposed to follow the path of and go
Mm-hmm.
past. And people were interacting with that tweet, and they're like, oh, I wish they would come over here. I've got guns, I've got this, I'm going to use them for target practice, and
No.
just really, really, really aggressive things you do not want to happen. And I showed her these things, and I'm like, hey, this is already getting out of hand. You can't take this back at all. So what you should do is maybe delete the tweet, or if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
leave it up, reschedule the protest and only send it through messages to the people you know want to attend. Do not put it on
Exactly.
social media again, because now they're going to create a blockade and a literal human chain at the location and on the day of what you have advertised. Change the
Mm-hmm.
day covertly so you can still have this protest but not be met with potential violence.
Exactly.
She doubled down and was saying, "Oh, we need to. I don't want to give in. It feels like I'm letting the other side win." I'm like, "Look, you're not letting anybody win. Whether it happens on the Sunday or the Monday, it doesn't matter. You just need to have it on a different day for the safety of not only you but the protesters.
Exactly.
Like, you need to think outside of yourself." And they kept referring it to the protest as their own, as my protest. And I was trying to debunk that. I'm like, look, this movement isn't you. This is bigger than you. You're
It's bigger than
organizing
us.
one protest, but now it's out of your hands and it might end badly. You need to rethink how you're going about this. But she
Mm-hmm.
decided she was going to hold it on that same day anyways. So this whole time I'm like waging a social media campaign on Instagram, telling people don't go to this protest, don't go to this protest. And same
Mm-hmm.
as I'm breaking it down now, I explained to people I'd spoken to the organizer and this was what was going to happen, and this is what was being what this is what was going to um this is how they were going to be met in terms of the Smithtown residents who were inciting violence. And I had Smithtown residents who saw my post on Instagram as well as my tweets DM me and tell me, "Hey, thank you for doing this. I tried to contact her. She changed her username. She blocked me, and or like was just ignoring me the whole time." And I had Smithtown residents who weren't even in Smithtown anymore, like former Smithtown
Yeah.
residents, reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'm in this group chat or this Facebook group called Long Islanders for Trump, Lift." Cute, right? And they sent me screenshots of comments about this protest, and people were threatening to bring their guns, threatening to
No.
shoot protesters, threatening to beat them up, and all these things. These are grown people
It's
now.
sickening.
These
That's
are parents, uncles, aunts, business owners, and this is what they were planning to do to protesters if they were to see said protesters.
mm-hmm.
So I took all of those screenshots, I put them up on social media, I blocked their names out. Honestly, should have left them up because now the public needs to know this person is a racist, bigoted scumbag, and also
Who will shoot?
wants to shoot and kill protesters for exercising their First Amendment right. However, due to the nature of the poster, I understood where their fear was coming from.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
It was
even
sending mixed
still,
signals.
they don't want these protests happening because they don't believe in Black Lives Matter. They don't see it to be a peaceful movement, and they're already bigoted and hateful to begin with. Not all of them, but enough of them to cause for concern.
Right. So that made it just worse.
Exactly. So
Okay.
I spread all of this. News channels got hold of it. I contacted somebody at News 12 that I knew. I had
Mm-hmm.
people wrote articles on the Patch and TBR News Media. They reached out to me. They quoted me in there, and I was just trying to stop this train wreck from happening because it was
Right.
moving full steam ahead, considering the organizer wasn't going to budge on the day. And I got in contact with two other people who were um, willing to help me
Mm-hmm.
in remedying the situation to ensure it would be a peaceful protest. They got in touch with the precinct, I think it's the second precinct in Smithtown or the fourth precinct, and got in
Mm-hmm.
touch with detectives and police officers there to make sure that we would have proper safety and correspondence with them at said protest, because it
Mm-hmm.
was already out of the hands of the organizer and they weren't going to be able to change things
Mm-hmm.
just themselves. So it took somebody above them to then
Mm-hmm.
help the protest. So all of this is happening. They finally got clearance from the police, which is one thing the original organizer did. She did get in contact with the local law enforcement to make sure it would be a lawful gathering.
Mm-hmm.
So I will commend her for that. But we got in touch with the local precinct. Everything was organized, got local speakers, got town representatives, like town officials, to make sure that a statement would be put out denouncing the perceived violent nature of this protest,
Mm-hmm.
and basically did damage control on this protest because it was shaping up to be so much worse than what it ended up being.
Yes.
Finally, on the day of, the organizer arrived. Everything went off without a hitch. Everybody reunited. I wasn't personally able to attend because this was blowing out to be something that, if anybody was to want to target me, my name was now all over social media. So they
Yeah.
wanted
It was
to
a
tie
see.
it back to me and then find me. Even though I was doing the Smithtown residents a service, to be honest, I'm trying to make sure your town doesn't get messed up and you don't do anything stupid. But if
Mm-hmm.
anybody wanted to do anything to me, my name was out there and they would be able to find me through it. So
Exactly.
I took the back seat, and not to mention COVID was also out. So I took the back seat. I let the two people I worked with go ahead, take care of everything. I let the police do what they did. The organizer did what she had to do, and everything went off without a hitch. But this was just a big misunderstanding and the most perfect like portrayal of intention versus impact.
Exactly.
She had pure intentions, but how she went about it and how it was received, the impact was completely counter to that.
Mm-hmm. You have to pay attention to everything.
Yep.
That's true. And in that note on intention versus impact, I guess that kind of ties with allyship.
Yep.
So how can you be an ally to the Black Lives Matter movement? In your opinion, how do you think a person can be an ally?
If you want to be a
Specifically,
proper ally, hold on, go ahead.
specifically, a white person or a person that's not a person of color.
Got you. Now, if you wish to be an ally in any movement, I'm going to be general, then I'm going to specify. If you want to be an ally in any movement, understand the privileges you hold that the group you're advocating for doesn't. And then use said privilege to uplift, support, and protect the group you're advocating on behalf of. That is the most important thing. And make sure while you're doing this, you inform yourself about the struggles of this group. Do not go into it blindly with a bleeding heart, just thinking, oh, it's just empathy, 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 sympathy. Because I feel bad, I'm going to go out and do this. No, because then you have so many potential pitfalls. You could be ignorant in the language you use. You could overstep your boundaries in terms of how much you're getting involved with this movement. You could censor yourself, which is the worst thing you could do, because if this group is marginalized and you hold privileges they don't, you're more than likely going to be centered in other places and in society in general where they won't. So don't make it about you.
Right.
Now, to bring it to the Black Lives Matter movement, if you are a white presenting person of color, understand you hold, to a degree, white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
You could just be a white, you could be a, not white presenting, white passing. You could be
Okay.
a white passing Puerto Rican, Mexican, Argentinian, Brazilian. The world will see you as white before anything else. And understand that is a privilege that affords you opportunities that it doesn't to your more melanated and darker skinned counterparts within your
Mm-hmm.
culture and outside of your culture.
Right.
Your role then is to listen to what they need. Listen to what they need. Listen to what their problems are. Do research if you have to so you can understand it on a systemic level, because no matter what, you need to listen to the lived experiences of those you know. To just do research and trivialize their lived experiences and need to do homework in order to humanize and understand where they're coming from is to go about it the complete wrong way. I shouldn't have to tell you I shouldn't have to tell you that I get racially profiled and you be like, nah, man, I don't think so. I've never seen it happen. You get, when we're around cops, you're pretty okay. You shouldn't have to read an article about Trayvon Martin to then
Mm-hmm.
and then all the other black men and people who've been racially profiled and killed to then understand it's a systemic issue and come back to me and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand, I didn't believe you. Like, that is so detrimental to my mental well-being and my emotional well-being, because you're trivializing my livelihood for the sake of needing empirical evidence. Why do you need outside sources to validate something I'm telling you here as a friend, someone you actually know?
Right. You have to
So
listen.
you need to
Mm-hmm.
understand that as much as you are advocating for all these other causes in the Black Lives Matter movement, other movements, that you also give the same attention and care to the people from those communities you have in your everyday life.
Yes.
You have to do that.
Yeah, I feel like a big part of it is you have to listen. You have to also learn, amplify, and act. You have to act on everything that you're learning,
Most definitely.
both through like research and both through talking to people who have experienced racism and who have experienced discrimination and all of these things.
Hmm. And you also need to make it your job to speak to your family members and those in your friend groups that I don't have access to let
Mm-hmm.
them know what I'm going through and why this struggle and fight is happening in the first place. It's not enough for you as a white person or as a non-black person of color to talk to me about Black Lives Matter. I know this. I live this. You're preaching to the choir. I don't need to hear any of this from you. At this point, you're trying to win some kind of allyship cookie, which I will not give to you. You have to speak to the people in your life who do not understand it, who are against it, and who
Mm-hmm.
avoid it, because those are the people that we need to either get on board with the movement or to at least
Exactly.
understand it enough to get out of its way,
Mm-hmm.
not
Yeah,
obscure it and not obstruct it.
for
Because
sure.
so many of my white friends, you have access to spaces I never will. You have access to people I never will, who will listen to you more readily than they will me. You need to speak to them. Don't sit here and wax poetic with me about Baldwin and Ta-Nehisi Coates and how you've read all these different things. I don't care. It's good for you that you've done all this work, but you're telling it to the wrong person.
Yes. Yeah,
Speak
we
to the
need to.
people who actually need to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's not, nothing's going to happen if we just keep having the same conversations with people who understand. We have to have the uncomfortable conversations and the ones with people who just don't even understand or get it, because then if we change their point of view, or we change, or we even get them to empathize or start to do their own research or act on it, then that's when we know that we're doing some good, I would say. We know
Exactly.
that it's spreading.
And to add to that, if
Mm-hmm.
you were to be in an actual protest or you're in protest organizers, similar to the one who had the protest in Smithtown,
Mm-hmm.
understand it is not your movement. You might organize it, but it is not your movement. And if you were to organize such a thing in isolation without the input of a black person or a member of the group you are trying to advocate for, you are doing them and yourself a disservice. If you're a white person and you organize a protest and there's not one black person that you either refer to or have helped you or present at that protest that you then hand the megaphone to,
Yeah.
you're doing it wrong. Your job
Mm-hmm.
is to give them the platform and then protect them while they're on said platform.
Exactly.
And sometimes that literally means, in the case of so many protests, physically putting yourself in between that black person and the police officer, because the police officer will hesitate to hit you much more than they will when they think about hitting me.
Right. That's 100% true. And we've seen that. We've literally seen that.
Like, at this point, if people don't get it, they don't understand the Black Lives Matter movement and just why there needs to be justice, they're being willfully ignorant. And that is something I myself have zero tolerance for.
Mm-hmm.
Willful ignorance in the case of the Black Lives Matter movement and so many other things can result and oftentimes results in death.
Yes.
Willful ignorance during apartheid resulted in death. Willful ignorance on the part of certain European nations during the Holocaust resulted in death. Willful ignorance during slavery resulted in death. Willful ignorance in regards to what is happening in Yemen right now is resulting in death in a whole country damn near going extinct. Willful ignorance on the part of Jewish people in regards to Palestine results in death.
Mm-hmm.
I do not tolerate or entertain willful ignorance when we exist in a time and age where you have access to every
So
bit of
much.
information you could ever need.
Right. We're in the information age.
If you don't know, honestly, I would rather you not come to me and ask, because I already have to perform the emotional labor of advocating for myself and others and surviving and continuing to educate me, because the public school system and American educational system has already failed me in that I have to research my own history.
Yes, that's a whole other
I have to do
subject. Oh
all
my
of this,
gosh.
and now I have to turn around and have a conversation with you about it. No. There are
Mm-hmm.
white people who have done this work already. There are black people who've done this work already. Their work is out there for you to use, same as it was for me. Do the little bit of work it takes to research it and save me the heartache and the headache of having to listen to your ignorant and just a lot of times violent words, because we think uh, in the in the case of microaggressions, we call them
Mm-hmm.
microaggressions. But if you've ever had, like you were speaking about it the other day in regards to you getting box braids, the microaggressions you face,
Yeah.
those things are called microaggressions, but they can have long lasting traumatic effects on us. They're acts of violence. They
Yes.
can
The
beat
emotional
down your
trauma.
self-esteem and morale. We call them microaggressions, but they're so much bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to entertain these quote unquote microaggressions from you when we're having this conversation, when you could do your work and then come to me to have a conversation, an informed one. Because if you approach me from a place of ignorance and not knowing without already doing preliminary work, I have every reason and every right to shut you down when you come to me and say all lives matter, or why can't we say all lives matter? Are you serious right now? We're in the middle
Ridiculous.
of an uprising and you're still coming to me when all of these resources are available on the same internet we both coexist on?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Exactly.
I'm not
Social
here
media.
for it anymore. People need to understand the work has to be done on your part before you can come and try and hold these conversations.
Now, here are my 2 cents. Before coronavirus, there was already a virus that has been around since the beginning of the country, and that is racism. Racism is structured into this country and into the criminal justice system. For there to be change, it needs to happen systemically and systematically. Otherwise, injustice basically seems infinite. There's too much mourning, too many hashtags, and too little actual change happening. It's crazy and disheartening to realize that this will probably be reality for a long time coming. And what will it take for the systemic change to actually occur? I'm only 19 years old right now, and I'm already tired of all the lives lost, racist remarks, and injustices that occur every day. Now, a social solution to police brutality against black people is starting with spreading awareness and to continue fighting the fight. It is not a moment, it is a movement. It's a revolution. Fight in the revolution. Black lives matter, and if there's no justice, there is no peace. I know I want a peaceful world. What about you? Thank you for joining the Social Solution with Maya Brown, and thank you, Durron and Julio, for joining me today. Make sure you listen to the next episode, in which it is part 2 of The Virus That Is Racism. This is Maya Brown, and remember that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.